Nobody on the ridge paid her much attention. That was the honest truth of it, and Staff Sergeant Holt would say so plainly when he told this story later, in every version to anyone who would listen. She was just the maintenance lady. The woman in the faded work vest who came out to the firing line before exercises, ran a rod through the barrels, checked the bipod mounts, and kept the range rifles in better shape than half the armory staff. She smelled like solvent and gun oil. She wore her hair back in a clip, not a regulation cut. She nodded to the shooters when they arrived, and they nodded back the way you nod at a vending machine. Present, useful, invisible. That was the picture on the morning the exercise at Ashwood Draw went wrong. Fort Demings Canyon qualification range ran deep between two ridgelines, a long pale draw that the afternoon light reached only sideways, throwing shadows across the rock walls like fingers pointing at the floor. Holt had 8 men in the draw, qualified riflemen, all of them. They had come down the North Ridgeline on a standard movement exercise with an opposing force element playing the enemy position, simulated, scripted, all of it supposed to play out by the range card, except the range card was wrong. The opposing force had set up a half-kilometer farther back than the scenario called for, behind a shelf of broken rock that turned the draw into a kill box the moment Holt's element stepped into it. Holt keyed his radio. What he said into it was not printable. What came back was Range Officer Captain Gruber's voice, flat and quick. All personnel on the ridge. I need a qualified shooter at the Ashwood position. Confirm availability. 17 active-duty riflemen were somewhere on that ridge in various states of moving to their next position. Not one of them could reach the Ashwood firing point in time. It was 400 meters of switchback trail to the main overlook. Holt's element had maybe 8 minutes before the opposing force reoriented and walked fire down the draw. He heard this on the radio. He did the math. He did not like the math. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that she was already there. She had been at the Ashwood position since dawn. Range maintenance ran early. She had come up the service trail alone before any of the shooters arrived with a toolkit and the rifle case she carried every Tuesday and Thursday morning to this overlook. The 3 range rifles, the bipod bolts, the scope rings. She had done it so many times she no longer looked at what her hands were doing. She felt for the torque, the resistance, the slight give that told her the zero was good or needed adjustment. The overlook was hers in those early hours before the shooters arrived, before the exercise began, before she became part of the background. She knew the draw below the way you know a room you have lived in for years, the way the morning shadow fell off the east wall, the way the wind came through the notch in the south ridgeline in the hour before noon, the way the heat shimmer built off the canyon floor by mid-afternoon. She had not planned to stay as long as she had. She sat on the equipment crate with the oil rag and the last rifle clean in her hands, and she watched the light move across the far rock shelf, and she let herself be quiet for a while. That was what she came for if she was honest, not just the work. The range speaker crackled with Gruber's voice, and she was already standing before the transmission finished. She stood up. What happened next? Holt heard it from the radio, from Gruber's channel, before he understood what he was hearing. Ashwood position, this is Gruber, who is on that overlook. A pause, then her voice level as a carpenter's rule. Carver, range maintenance. Gruber's response came back fast and not kindly. Stand clear. I need a trained shooter, not the maintenance lady. Holt, crouched behind a rock shelf with 7 men and incoming rounds snapping overhead, heard that exchange and felt nothing about it. He was too busy being shot at. He would feel something about it later. What he heard next was silence on the channel, a long silence. Then Gruber again, his voice shifted slightly, tighter, the way a voice gets when a man has run out of other options and knows it. Carver, do you have eyes on the opposing force position? Her voice still level, yes. Can you take the shot? A pause so brief Holt almost missed it. Which one? That was the moment Holt understood she was not asking about the situation. She was asking Gruber to be specific. She already knew the situation. She was telling him she could see all of them. Gruber told her. She said nothing after that. The channel went quiet. What Holt saw from the draw was this. Nothing. He saw nothing. The rock walls rose on either side of him, and the afternoon light came sideways, and the muzzle flashes from the opposing force position blinked from behind the shelf of broken stone 400 meters ahead, and then the first one stopped. Just stopped. There was no drama in it. The flash was there and then it was not. Holt did not hear a report. The distance was too great and the ridge absorbed the sound. One moment there was a problem and the next moment there was one fewer problem, and the math of it arrived in his chest before his mind caught up. What he did not know, what he could not see from the draw, was what the Ashwood Overlook looked like at that exact moment. He would piece it together later from the range log, from Gruber's account given reluctantly in the debrief, from the two men who had been moving across the ridge trail on another approach, and stopped when they heard the first report and watched. She had settled behind the rifle without ceremony. No adjustment, no settling in, no visible preparation beyond what she had already done in her own mind before her body arrived at the bench. She had laid herself flat behind it as if she were lying down in a familiar bed. Her cheek found the stock. Her hands found their places. The rag was on the crate. She breathed once, long and slow, and the range went quiet around her in the way ranges go quiet when something real is about to happen. Not the manufactured quiet of a range officer's command, but the instinctive quiet of the air itself. She called her own data. No spotter, no second voice in her ear reading wind or distance or the angle of the light. She had the data in her head, where it had always lived, where it had been filed away for years under a call sign and a service number, and a record that no one on this ridge had thought to pull until now. The wind came through the notch in the south ridgeline. She waited for it to settle. Then she fired. Then the second one. Then the third. Holt was counting without knowing he was counting. He would remember that later, the way his body kept score while his brain was still processing. The draw was going quiet. Not the quiet of a pause, not the quiet of a reload. The quiet of a solved equation. The fourth shot arrived, and the last muzzle flash went dark. Holt's radio crackled. Gruber's voice, and something in it Holt had never heard from him before, a kind of restraint, the voice of a man choosing each word carefully. "Holt, Ashwood is clear. Move your element out." Holt moved his element out. They came up the north trail in a loose column, 8 men, all present, none of them bleeding, and by the time they reached the top of the ridgeline the sun had dropped behind the western wall, and the canyon below was filling with shadow. Holt was the first one over the rim. He looked toward the Ashwood firing point. She was there, standing at the bench, not behind it. The rifle, one of the range rifles, a Bolt Action .308 she had pulled from the rack that morning and serviced herself, was on the bipod where she'd left it. She was wiping her hands on the oil rag. She looked at Holt the way she had looked at him every other time he had come through this range. A nod, acknowledgement, nothing more. Gruber was already there. He was standing 4 feet from her with his tablet in his hand and his face the color of old concrete. Holt would remember that face. He had never seen Gruber look like that. Gruber looked like a man who had asked someone to hand him a kitchen knife and been handed a sword. He was reading her file. It had taken the range system 40 seconds to pull. She had entered her service number when she signed in that morning. She always did. It was on the maintenance log and the system had it. And when Gruber typed the query it came up in full. Not a summary. The whole file. Holt read it over Gruber's shoulder, without being invited to. Staff Sergeant Lena Carver, United States Marine Corps, retired. Scout Sniper qualification earned at age 26, the youngest woman to complete the course in the program's history, 3 deployments. Service record sealed in part under a classified operational citation. The line that made Holt go still. Confirmed long-range engagement record, night conditions, thermal optics, distance verified by independent observer, 2,780 meters. He looked from the tablet to the draw below. The draw was 2,780 meters to the far rock shelf. He knew the range card. He had paced the distance himself as a junior sergeant years ago, the first time he ever shot at Ashwood. She had not been guessing, she had not been hopping, she had been home. Holt looked at her. She was still wiping her hands. She had not looked at the tablet. She did not need to see what was on it. At the bottom of the file, under call signs logged in the system from her service jacket, candlelight. Holt did not ask about that. He would ask someone later. What he learned was that the name had come from her spotter on her first qualified long-range engagement, in the dark, at distance, with no margin for error. 1 point of light in the nothing. 1 shot. The spotter had said it was like watching someone light a single candle in a warehouse and hit a target on the far wall. The name had stayed. Gruber had not spoken since Holt arrived. He stood with the tablet at his side now, not reading it anymore, just holding it. Holt watched him work through something private and arrive at a decision. Gruber reached up and took off his cover. He held it at his side. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Behind Holt, on the Ridgeline Trail, the other 17 shooters had begun to arrive at the overlook in 1s and 2s, coming in from their positions across the range. They came up the trail expecting a debrief, a critique, the routine business of a range day. Instead, they found a woman at the Ashwood bench with an oil rag in her hand and a file on the range officer's tablet that said what it said. They read it, those who got close enough, or they heard it from the man beside them. And then, one by one, and not because anyone gave an order, they stopped moving. They faced the bench. They stood at attention. Not all at once, not sharply, the way a formation snaps to when a command is given. Slowly. The way a room goes quiet when someone important walks in. The way men acknowledge something they were not expecting and cannot argue with. 17 shooters. She looked up once at the line of them, and then she looked back down at the oil rag and finished what she was doing. She folded the rag and set it on the crate. When the battalion commander arrived, someone had called him. Holt did not know who. He walked the length of the firing line and looked at the draw below and at the file on Gruber's tablet and at the woman standing at the bench. He was a quiet man, the battalion commander. He had not made general by being loud. He looked at her for a moment and she looked back. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was all that needed to be said. Holt had watched enough men receive enough honors in his years of service to know that the grandest ceremonies were not always the most real ones. Sometimes the real one was a nod on a ridge at dusk, with the canyon going dark below and 17 men at attention behind you, and an oil rag folded on a crate beside the rifle you had just shot clean through 400 meters of doubt. Holt would tell this story for the rest of his career. He would tell it accurately. He would say exactly what he had thought when he saw her, that she was the maintenance lady, the woman in the work vest, part of the furniture of the range. He would say that without embarrassment because the embarrassment was part of the truth, and the truth was the whole point. He would say, we did not know what she was. And then he would say, she did not need us to. That was the thing about a candle. It did not ask you to believe in it. It just burned. And the darkness, whatever it thought of itself, had no answer for that.